in our final exam schedule. We are the Tuesday of final exam week. I showed you how to get to that, etc. So good. Okay, happy Thursday to you all. And let's get into the business at hand. If I remember right, on Tuesday was when this projector wasn't working right, so I had to jump a wee little bit. Let's pick up some anatomy that I bypassed because of not having access to the overhead. We had discussed about, you can't see that. We had discussed about, we did the fornix, we did where the cervix enters the vagina, etc. Now we go to the outside anatomy. Okay, we need whiteness, control, iris is too bright. So they brought me a new one of these projectors here, but of course it's all falling stuff. But I think we're getting better. The definition we want to work on is perineum. Perineum has got two different definitions. One's anatomical, which is what we anatomy teachers teach. And then there's one clinical, which is the one you're going to use once you get out of this room and go off someplace to use it. So what is the anatomical perineum? It's an area that you see in the two black triangles. And it is at the anterior end, the pubic symphysis, and I wish these landmarks had shorter names. But there's the pubic symphysis, the anterior end, and then off to the sides are the two ischial tuberosities. So there's an ischial tuberosity. Remember, that's the rough part in your sit-down bones. Ischial tuberosity. And then here to the back is the coccyx. Remember to pronounce the word six on the end of that, coccyx. Okay, now that's gives us two separate triangles. The triangle in the front is labeled the genital triangle. Because it has the urethra and the opening of the vagina. Back here is the anal triangle. And there, the anatomy professors now feel that they've defined perineum, and you've got an idea of the pelvic floor. And that's okay. But really, clinically, the perineum is just this region from the opening of the vagina back towards the anus, just that area there. And we call that the clinical perineum. And that's the area between the vagina and the anus. Now, do men have a perineum? Of course they do. But there's not much medicine that involves that. With women, one of the problems that can occur is when you're having a baby. And in that process, they might do an incision, which is called a what? Episiotomy, they all shout it out. Episiotomy, which is an incision, nothing's being removed. I misspelled that. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, an episiotomy, which is defined as an incision from the vagina into the perineum. What would be the purpose of performing this during childbirth, which is pretty much the only time you do this? Perhaps, although usually if you hear baby too big, it's bone problems. It's not negotiating the turn. If it can make the turn around through the pelvic bones, it can get born, even if it tears the tissue in the perineum. But it does perhaps speed up birth. Second advantage of this is it provides more room for putting in forceps or the vacuum extractor that they will use. It just makes more room. Controversial, quite so, because there are some doctors I know locally who had never delivered a baby without doing the episiotomy, who is reported to have held the baby's head back so he could do the episiotomy. Do you recall what the SOP, standard operating procedure, and for this guy, it was standard operating procedure. All the women had episiotomies. Well, part of the reason we have that many episiotomies is because we've altered childbirth from the primitive way that it would happen in ways that we'll teach later. But simply putting the woman on her back is, the first wrong step, perhaps, in the process of childbirth. We'll come back to that. So there are a lot of women that can deliver without episiotomies. In some cases, it can be beneficial, but it's considered to be done way too much by some doctors. Yes?
They won't even do episiotomies at Hershey Med anymore. They say that they think that it heals better if it just rips if it happens to rip it. They say it heals
very good. Then I might be preaching to the non-choir, in which it's changing. Good to hear that. I was a childbirth instructor for 3 years, but that was over 10 years ago at Harrisburg Hospital, and I was nationally certified, ICEA. It wasn't Lamaze, I was International Childbirth Educators Association. One of only about a dozen men in the United States who were childbirth instructors when I was certified. And for 3 years, the couples would come in with their blankets and things. We talked about, process, and I attended a few births, no procedures, just, coach, support, things like that. It was very interesting and informative, but at that time, we were pointing out that you should talk to your doctor. Am I going to need an episiotomy? And sometimes, once again, the pat on the head, figuratively, saying, oh, don't worry about it. We'll only do it if you need it. But what you really want to ask is, how often do you do an episiotomy during, delivering babies? Most of the time, half the time, seldom. And it looks like, and I appreciate that report, that it's changing. So that's kind of good. So part of the trouble with episiotomies was they didn't study the recovery period very well. Doctors prefer to stitch up a nice, neat incision rather than a tear. But an incision cuts through cells and cuts through muscle cells. Whereas if the woman tears, she'll tear along a line of weakness. If you stitch that back up, they heal quicker. Here's part of the trouble, is we say, okay, you've had a baby, no sex for 6 weeks. Let's suppose you actually wait for 6 weeks. And then you resume intercourse. When a woman has an orgasm, part of what contracts is the muscles in the perineum. And if there's a couple of stitches in there, it's kind of like, ow, can't we wait until, 2012 or something? Think about resuming. So it was less comfortable in terms of just recovery. So I leave it out there as still being controversial because it will depend upon what part of the country you're in and which hospital you tend to get trained at if you get trained, and who's doing the work. Okay, enough of that. Another bit of anatomy. There is an area called the vestibule. You won't hear this as much as the term vulva. Now, what's the difference? Vestibule is, again, what the anatomy instructors use to refer to this whole area between the two labia, the opening of the urethra, the vagina, things like that. In other words, the area of the urogenital triangle. Vulva is just like scrotum. It's a good word for what you see externally. Newborn baby girl, vulva, probably the only thing you need to mention. We tend to make up words for parts of our anatomy, partly to help our own embarrassment at actually saying things out in public. One time, one of my boys went to Manglestown Elementary kindergarten, I think, and somebody brought in a mother cat that was nursing little baby kittens. And oh, isn't that cute? They gathered around, and the teacher said, you know, those kittens grew up in the mother's tummy. Yes, no. No, they didn't, teacher. They grew up in the mother's uterus. That's nice. So we had the parent-teacher conference that we do all the time, you know, and they said, what do you do for a living, Mr. Sundred? And I teach biology. Oh, okay. And she told us that story. But, you know, it does not hurt the kids to actually know the names of the parts of their anatomy: vulva, penis, scrotum. It's all right. It doesn't, we get nervous about it, but not them. Okay, so what do we find within the area of the vestibule? Well, it's bordered by two folds of skin that are the labia majora, the major folds. The artist did not sketch them on this because he was dissecting deeper to show some underlying structures. But this is like the scrotum. Has skin, it has hair follicles on it. Then inside are the labia minora. It's sheer accident, but it sounds like the multi-candlestick, you know, Jewish candlestick, candelabra. Labia minora, the minor folds. And these, like the glans penis, stratified squamous epithelium, non-keratinized, delicate, they sort of illustrate them there on the side. Then, from the front to the back, in the anterior end is the clitoris. And of this we say it is the homologue of the penis. And that's going to take some explaining. Homologue means it comes from the same embryonic source. Obviously, you know, fingers on men and women come from the same embryonic source. We don't even think twice about that. But in creating the difference between male and female anatomy, there are some obviously significant changes. For the first month, you really do not know if it's going to be a boy or a girl. And yes, you can take a look at the XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes and tell from that. But here we are, not yet having descended down either pathway. And so male and female alike produces a glans, and no, it's not blue and yellow. That's just so we can follow the tissues. There's a swelling that we use the term labioscrotal. Don't write that down unless you're curious about embryology. But this is either going to be the labia majora or it's going to be the testis, the scrotum, not the testis, the scrotum. It's going to be one or the other, but it hasn't committed yet. Also, this is the opening of the urethra in this area right here. Now suppose it's going to become a male. Then it follows down this pathway here. And what happens is the underside of the penis begins to close and actually form a tube. Now in adult males and in newborn males, there is a seam that runs right down the scrotum and actually practically all the way down to the anus. And that's called the raphe, which just means the seam. In other words, these two sides grew together. When we study the oral cavity, you know, behind your lips, there's that labial frenulum, which is just because the two sides grew together. And we see this seam as well. And that's why men have created a structure that women don't have in the clitoris. Men created the corpus spongiosum, down through which the urethra travels. That's an invention that, you know, is not there in the female. Also, if you understand that this closes underneath, just like spina bifida, which we will get to, and cleft palate, which you already have been told about, that can fail to close. And it's a term called hypospadia. There's 1,000 birth defects, so we're not going to list them. But in hypospadia, the underside of the urethral groove there doesn't completely close. When the boy, the toddler, urinates, it comes out the bottom of the penis, not the tip, as it would when properly formed. Ancient days, that's just what you lived with. Then we developed surgery, aseptic techniques, anesthesia, doctors now routinely can close that, probably leaving no evidence whatsoever except a medical note someplace that that was repaired. Okay, so that is the story of the underside, and that leaves us then with the glans penis. It leaves us with the prepuce, which they don't illustrate covering it. But when a boy baby is born, that foreskin covers the glans penis, and actually it shouldn't be retracted right away because it still is adherent. It takes months before it really will comfortably retract. If you're going to do a circumcision, part of the reason the boy baby starts crying is the separation of the foreskin from the glans penis. That's perhaps as rough as any other part of the surgery. Circumcision's done normally without anesthesia because it's relatively short. I suspect that will gradually change over time. More to comfort the parents than any concerns over the boy's temporary hurt. I mean, you know, he's going to swing upside down on a tree, fall down, you know, skin his elbow, suffer worse pain and be aware of it. But moving on. If we're going to be a female, however, well, of course, we don't close this groove. Instead, we form the labia majora. There's no testes that descend into that. It's just the major folds of skin. Here's your labia minora, the minor folds. There is still a glans, but now we call it the glans clitoris. And as the rest of the child grows, as the fetus grows, the gland stays really relatively small. And in cross-section, it is quite short. Its major function, it just simply seems to be a very sensitive part of the female anatomy. In some women, the orgasm is very much associated with it. Here in this cross-section, you can see all they've illustrated here is the corpora cavernosa, only one of them. There are two corpora cavernosa, no corpus spongiosum, and there is a glans at the tip. Now, I think I may have mentioned this in my notes on the web, but if you look up female circumcision, you'll be rather unhappy as you go through the different sites. That's kind of a euphemism for the removal of the clitoris, which is not really circumcision. The more brutal name for that is genital mutilation. And if it really gets controversial, and I'll simply leave it up to you to go out and look it up and just see. Because it is somewhat cultural based. Some people think it's religion based, but from what I've read, it's more often the villages, the culture that reinforces that. And I'll leave it at that. Just because I find myself getting disturbed as I talk about that practice. I will make one other comment. We have sometimes, as faculty, gotten together at in-service, had, you know, different sorts of education. And one time we had a big thing where that we were told you need to value other cultures equally with your own. And I said, no, I can't do that. If it involves genital mutilation, I can't value that. If it involves the honor killing of a girl that was raped in order to clear the family's honor, I can't buy that either. So there's certain things from other cultures that I just can't put up with. So, but I have tenure, so they can't fire me. We move on. And let's see. Okay, so that's it about that. The next part, below the clitoris, is the opening of the urethra. And then below that, the opening of the vagina, which may sometimes have a hymen. Then, once again, we're way into sociological implications here. Because in most cultures around the world, the hymen was a mark of virginity. If you bought yourself a wife for 10 cows, you could have her checked out, and if the hymen was not intact, then you could subtract a cow. But there are women born without. Well, first of all, what is it? It's an embryonic remnant. This opening does not exist in the developing embryo, so the opening is created. But there is some tissue that is left behind. It has no function. And it, in some women, is like mostly complete. If it is completely complete, that can be a problem when you hit the menstrual cycle. It can get torn during the pelvic exam. It can get torn during ballet exercises. Infamously, it gets torn during first intercourse. But there are women who bleed when this happens and women who don't bleed when this happens. In the back villages of Italy, when a woman got married, it was expected the next morning that you would display the bloody sheet out the window to indicate that she was a virgin and had been, you know, the term they use is deflowered, and on her wedding night. And I imagine that there were some goats who got their ankles pricked in the middle of the night, you know, just to satisfy this. And, okay, travel around the world and pay attention, and you'd be grateful you live where we do. All right, so this structure, again, no function, varies. Some women don't have it from birth, some partial, some imperforate, some septate. You can look it up. One other thing, I may have mentioned that there are surgeons, Japan is good at this, that can recreate a foreskin for men who've been circumcised and wanted that foreskin back. They can also recreate the hymen. So, you know, virginity can be surgically restored nowadays. We move on. And so that is the urogenital triangle. One other illustration I wanted to take a moment on. Then, you know, this is about the point in the class where somebody raises their hand and I think, do I really want to call on that person? They start sharing things. This was an excellent illustration that helps us to comprehend the menstrual cycle. You really do have all the notes on the menstrual cycle that are essential, but just a reminder that it shows you follicle-stimulating hormone creating this vesicular ovarian follicle, that estrogen causes the growth of the endometrium, and here we get a pretty good visual representation of the stratum basale, basalis, there's gone, which is the part that is not lost. And then up here, the stratum functionalis, pre-ovulatory phase. When does a woman ovulate? At about the 14th day. This is if they've got a standard 28-day cycle. So 2 weeks after what? After menstruation. The one external event that a woman can make a check mark on the calendar is when the menstrual flow begins. That's pretty obvious. So if you calculate 14 days after that, that's on the average when one is going to ovulate. But of course, one could ovulate a couple days early or a couple days late, plus your cycle could be shorter or longer than others on the average. So there's really a period here where the woman is most fertile. After ovulating, we now form the corpus luteum, producing its progesterone and estrogen. The thickening of the endometrium occurs, and everything is ready for pregnancy. If pregnancy does not occur, then we get the drop in progesterone because the corpus luteum shrinks and disappears. And then we get the shrinking of the lining, these spiral arterioles kink, and we get the menstrual flow. We're back to day 1 again. If you know when you are fertile, if you're trying to avoid getting pregnant, then, you know, that's the forbidden period for sex. You can't, you know, you have to abstain during that period of time. You know the type of people in our society that use this rhythm method of birth control? They're called parents. Because it is irregular. You know, the cycles are not as predictable as we sometimes would expect. Plus, you also assume that they don't go out on the 14th and party with the little adult beverages and then forget what time of the month it was that they weren't supposed to do what they just oops did. So it's a good way of spacing out children, but as far as you know, successfully never getting pregnant, it is not have a great track record. Okay. Question else to add to this. Why does this happen? I have made the comment that about 1/3 of all American women are anemic at some time in their life. And for a couple of you, that could be now. And part of that contributing factor is the menstrual flow. Back to primitive human beings. This was always there. There was always the loss of blood, which, by the way, can be very dangerous if you're up in Yellowstone Park and the grizzlies are out. Pennsylvania black bear, the same as the brown bear, it's just color phase. Pennsylvania black bear does not consider us food. If it knows you're around, they'll leave, take their cubs with them. Grizzly, on the other hand, smells menstrual blood. It thinks wounded animal. And if you're inside the tent, it'll make its own opening through the tent, and you'll make your own opening out the other side. It can be quite dangerous. So it's a bit of a risk, isn't it, in wild country, plus the loss of iron. Is there a benefit to it? The benefit goes back to the fact that human beings are among the most sexual of many of the animals. We continue to have intercourse even after the woman is pregnant. We told you the advantages is to keep him around so he can lift the heavy weights, you know, fight off the tigers and things like that, and protect the woman because we've given birth to these children that aren't very smart and need to be constantly helped and protected. Because of that, there's an increased introduction of bacteria. Sex is not a sterile event, and I do not mean by that, you know, causing a conception. There's bacteria and such that's introduced. Think of the human papillomavirus as just one of these. The menstrual flow seems to be advantageous in clearing out bacteria. It seems to be beneficial. And so that's why we get those cramps, that's why we get a couple of days of bleeding, is because bacteriologically it kind of helps. I would like to see a study on Depo-Provera. Oh, I can't say the name anymore. They're what?
Depo-Provera.
Depo-Provera, yeah, I think I said it right. And others that simply suppress the menstrual cycle. And you know, to see whether or not there's any correlation at all with that and uterine infections. Don't know. I'm sure they check things like that. So I'm just tossing out a theory that there has to be some advantage to it, and that seems to me to be the best advantage, is bacteriological. Okay, conception. Remember that the acrosome of the sperm produces the hyaluronidase, and so we had to have many, many sperm eventually arrive at the egg. But the question is, where does fertilization take place? And if anybody says the backseat of a Chevy, I'm just throwing you out. We will not do jokes like that in this class. No, fertilization actually takes place in the fallopian tube. The sperm heading off in both directions, eventually some of them, enough of them, are going to actually encounter the egg and fertilize it. And this will be up in the fallopian tube. So how long does it take before it actually descends to implant? 7 days or 1 week. Here we go. I think these are the ones I wanted. We're going to hop to a PowerPoint in just a minute, but I wanted to show you this variation. This one simply shows you that the sperm find the egg up here in the fallopian tubes. That's where conception occurs. Sometimes for the purpose of arguing, you know, we argue about abortion in our society. We argue over when is it life or not. And they argue the question, when does life begin? You don't ask that question, because when is there not life? The sperm has a metabolism. The egg has a metabolism. They unite, you conceive something. There is not two lifeless things that came together spontaneously and created life. So that something is always existent, always living. The real question is, when do we accord it the rights of a human being? And I don't want half of you throwing books at the other half, so let's not go there. But that's something that we debate. But sometimes we ask questions that really it's not a question. Well, the beginning divisions are called cleavage. And then eventually we get to the point where it implants. Now, on this transparency, and I don't want to keep digging through them, I should have had this up ahead of time. This one tells you day 8, the stage of development of implantation in the womb. I've got another in the stack that says day 6. Here's what's going on. On day 6, it lands. On day 7, it burrows in. On day 8, it finishes the process. So you can get 6, 7, or 8. Let's you and I agree that it takes 1 week. That's easy to remember. 7 days for implantation. At the end of the 7th day, it has implanted. I should have had this fired up already, but I was too impressed with the snow that was storm. And yes, I will try to remember to put this up on the website. But fetal development, fall. Here we go. Okay. Oh, yeah. I wish that had been me. I was so ugly when I was born, the doctor slapped my mother. Yeah, well, all right. Conception. An egg is good for about 1 day. Sperm are good for about 2 days. So that kind of gives a 3-day fertile period in a sense. That, you know, when the egg is ovulated, it's good for a day, but you could have some sperm that got there the day before. So it's entirely possible to have, you know, like sex on Saturday and then on Sunday you actually get pregnant, because that's the time that you ovulate and there's still sufficient sperm around to cause pregnancy. There's a view of the sperm looking vaguely like I sketched it. The collar doesn't look as large and you know, as I sketched it, but there it is. Down below here, and I think the next slide will show you this equally well, where there's the zona pellucida and many sperm. You know, the egg is not naked. It is surrounded by the corona radiata, a term that I could probably have taught it to you, but it's just all these other cells that kind of are the barrier to that sperm. So the acrosome releases hyaluronidase to break down this zona pellucida. And here we see comes the sperm. It kind of binds and breaks down and finally begins to work its way in. And here is an actual electron photomicrograph of a whole lot of sperm clinging to an egg. This is only when they get close. They can't tell it from an inch away. But when they get about, you know, 1/8 of an inch or so, then they begin to focus in on it. And so here's another good view. Now here they illustrate that the mitochondrial carrying midpiece or collar very well. Here in the purple, well, blue kind of is the part that has the DNA in it, and then on top of it the cap of the acrosome that helps to break down so that one can finally enter. A fertilized egg is a zygote. Please write that down. Definition of a zygote, if I might have, you know, define the following terms. Zygote, you write down it's a fertilized egg. What's interesting is this. You see what looks like 2 nuclei right here? You would think that the process of fertilization was when the head of the sperm enters the egg. And for simplicity's sake, we say that. But in reality, as you get closer to this, true fertilization is when the nucleus of the sperm unites with the nucleus of the egg. You don't actually get the second meiotic division until after a sperm has penetrated. This is a curious thing. I hope your notes say, and if not, write this down, that a woman ovulates a secondary oocyte. I don't trust that I said that, but I do know that I often ask it. A woman ovulates a secondary oocyte. This is the result of the first division of meiosis. But it needs one more division, and that will never happen unless a sperm enters. The entrance of the sperm actually triggers the second meiotic division. And then the nucleus of the sperm and the nucleus of the egg fuse, and now by golly you're up to the 2N phase. Some people were puzzled by the N. You know, there's 23 chromosomes that tell us how to make our body, but because we had a mom and a dad, that makes 46, or 2N, a double set. It's like having 2 pair of shoes in your closet instead of 1 pair of shoes. If that seems odd to you, are you aware that a cat does not even ovulate until she's been mated with? if you have a female cat in heat, and by the way, that's so embarrassing, to have a female cat in heat, you're just afraid to even pet her. And she is just hello, sailor out the window 24 hours a day. But if she does get with a male, she's pregnant. Because the process of mating causes her to ovulate. So, I mean, it's not gee whiz, oh, I don't know if she got pregnant or not. Trust me, if she was with the male, she's now pregnant. Any of you ever dissect a cat? Anyone dissect a cat? Did you have a male? Did you cut the foreskin? Did you see the barbs on the penis? Okay. This, I'm glad we as humans don't have. But the glans penis on the male cat has barbs that point backwards. When the male penetrates the female, he cannot withdraw until after he ejaculates. And so there's none of this, hey, was it good for you? She, when this is over, will turn around and take a swipe at him, and he heads for the hills. He doesn't text, nothing. He is out of here. And he never returns, and she doesn't want him to return. It is driven by instinct. Just wanted to point that out. So if she's been mated with, she's pregnant. Now, what's the deal with twins? Fraternal is where you can have a boy and a girl. This is twice as common. If you say so-and-so are twins, the chances are 2 out of 3 that they are going to be fraternal. Fraternity means, well, it means a group of men at college, but we could have just as well said maternal. The woman ovulated twice. There were 2 separate sperm. And they are as different as if they were born 10 years apart from the same parents. That's fraternal twins. Identical is just 1 egg and 1 sperm. It's just that early in the process, it's separated completely to give us identical twins. Here's a puzzle for you. My wife and I enjoy fresh blueberries on our cereal when we can afford it. And so I have a little Tupperware of blueberries that I set out this morning to put on my little frosted mini wheats. And I took a 4th out of there, and my wife took a 3rd out of there, and we both have the same amount. Okay, it's divided into 4ths like this because we wanted to have some tomorrow morning as well. So I took a 4th of this, and then my wife scooped in and she took a 3rd of what was left, but she didn't get extra. That's just one of those little math puzzles. My wife teaches 100 math classes, and those are people for whom they don't have the aptitude in math, and she said that would really blow the mind at some beginning. It's like a statistic, 40% of all sick days are taken on Mondays or Fridays. Well, go ahead and divide that into 5 boxes, and you realize that any 2 days is 40%. It doesn't mean that people are slacking off and making long weekends. They're just taking off when they're sick. That actually shows honesty, that 40% are Mondays or Fridays. All right, it's mathematics. By the way, I did post to the website. I don't know if anybody saw it yet, how to calculate your grade. Anybody bother to read it? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's silly. It goes on for a page and a half. My wife says it's too long. I said, well, I've never done that, so I thought I'd do it. The most famous set of conjoined twins were Chang and Eng. There they are. The men who originated the term Siamese twins. You notice right here in the chest area they are conjoined, and actually it's not just simply skin. There's some organ sharing there. They were born in Siam, although they were originally from China. To a Chinese father and half Chinese, half Malaysian mother. But because they were growing up in Siam, they were known as, while in Siam, the Chinese twins, but when they came to America from Siam, we called them the Siamese twins. And so today, if you happen to have conjoined, I tend to leave out the end just because I'm mistrained. Conjoined twins, if you have conjoined twins, we really should not call them Siamese twins. Just like Down syndrome should not be called mongoloidism. It's just, you're going back to an example. The story of this is interesting. Chang and N began to date Adelaide and Sarah Ann Yates, 2 of 9 daughters of a local farmer and part-time clergyman, David Yates. The townspeople disapproved. Good heavens, that monstrosity is dating 2 of our girls. So Chang and N scheduled a separation surgery in Philadelphia. Remember, this is back before trustable anesthesia. Their fiancés found out and quickly stopped the proceeding. Said, no way, you likely will die from that. And in April 1843, Chang was married to Adelaide, Ain to Sarah Ann in a double wedding. During the course of their marriages, Ain fathered 6 boys and 5 girls, Chang 7 girls and 3 boys. So here they are with their spouses on either side of them, and the beginning, of children. And here we see the descendants. This photo shows Chang on the right, his wife Adelaide, and son Patrick Henry, and Ain on the left with Sally and son Albert. And then here is kind of like a reunion photo. And we respect their privacy, and we will not think about process conception. It was a different world back then. Reunion of some 1,800 descendants of the Siamese twins, Chang and N, at Mount Airy in North Carolina. And so here's the road sign about it, settled as farmers in this neighborhood, died 1874. I mean, they were 2 separate people. What if Ain wanted to sleep in and Chang said, no, we got to get up and plow the back 40 acres? I wonder if they had arguments. I wonder how they got along. It's a different world.
When did you say they were born? 1811.
Got it? Okay, good. Thank you. Because I could get back there and find out. But,
What organs did they share?
What organs did they share?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know for sure.
So that would really stink if one ate something and the other didn't want to eat. And
No. I don't think that they shared digestive tubes. It may just be as far as the musculature. I think the biggest problem with separation, again, was no concept of aseptic technique nor anesthesia and blood transfusions. But anyway, so a whole lot of people get together and they all look just fine, reunions. Well, so here we go. Here is the egg, and it is fertilized, and then we get the first division and another division and another division. Here we are at what looks like to me about the 8-cell stage, because it divides 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. After a while, some parts divide faster, and it's no longer a neat power factor of 2. 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024, 2,048. How far can I go? 4,096. I stopped there. You can take over. At that point, I drop the 96 and take the 5 and move on from there. But anyway, notice this thick layer. What is this thick layer around here? Zona pellucida. The sperm got through it, but it's still there. What's its job right now? Holding these cells together. What if it doesn't do that good a job? Identical twins, identical triplets, identical quadruplets. These cells, each of them has the potential to become a complete body. And so if this fails to hold these together so that you get one person, like for most of us, then you get the identical twins, triplets, quadruplets, etc. Oh, what if it only partially divides? Then you really do get difficulties with extra limbs, sometimes partially divided. Sometimes they don't survive, sometimes they do. I figured I did enough curiosity with Chang and Ain, the Siamese twins. You can look up the other difficulties. The uterine tubes is ciliated and has a 2-layered muscularis. You know this already, but here's an excellent view of the cilia of the fallopian tube that helps to move the egg on down. So fertilization occurs within a day after ovulation, and then we go through cleavage. Why is it called cleavage? Because the cell is big, and yet it is small. How big is the human egg? If you look at any textbook or the Green Book and look at the period at the end of a sentence, that typesetter's period, that's the size of the human egg. It is so small that basically they didn't know it existed. They knew menstrual blood. They've known that from, the earliest recorded history. Religious prohibition starting up. You'll find concerns about the menstrual blood in the Bible, in the Koran, in the Upanishads, in the Hindu laws, and other things like that. It is most cultures have their prohibitions, their uncleanliness, and their superstitions regarding that. Even the primitive Aborigine, if he found out that his wife had actually laid on his blanket while she was having her period, he would literally die of fear, documented, because of the implications of that. So it kind of varies, but they didn't know about the egg, and so they thought that men planted the seed, we are of Abraham's seed, and woman was the oven. They were the nourishment. And so when they first developed microscopes after Leeuwenhoek, and they first looked at sperm, when they drew the sperm, they drew a tiny little baby curled up in the head of the sperm. It's called a homunculus. It's on the website. But if you look up that term, you will see they actually drew little tiny babies inside there. Just like they drew canals on Mars before their scopes got better and they realized there aren't any canals on Mars. What a loss that was to science fiction. Anyway, it's called cleavage. So when a biologist talks about cleavage, they're referring to these first few divisions. Once we get up to like 120 some odd, then after that we don't call it cleavage because the cells are so small that it doesn't take that long. The very first cleavage takes almost, 30 hours, day and a half to get that first cleavage. All right, then we get to a stage called morula. You can write that down if you want to. I usually don't ask that to come out of your memory, but it means blackberry, not the phone, the fruit, because it's just a big cluster of cells, so it's called a morula, like a blackberry. But this is the biggie that you need to know, a blastocyst. And I know I've got a couple illustrations coming up here that you'll see this better. But I want you to know blastocyst, that's the stage of implantation. Blastocyst, C-Y-S-T. Again, if you can't see it, I'll click and it'll show up a little bit better. This illustration says stem cells because what we actually have, and I will click now, the blastocyst has a cluster of cells called the inner cell mass. I ought to do this to that. I'm going to take inner cell mass. I'm going to Control V that, and then save it. And then it takes forever to save it. Thank you very much. Click, go back. There. Because you want to know those terms, inner cell mass. That's the future baby. This is Justin Bieber right here. You know? I mean, sure, he's only a dozen cells with, you know, kind of a, frankly, it's a Beatles haircut. But, you know, it's a new generation. They don't know the Beatles. So, you know, oh, Justin. Just glad I don't have a teenage daughter. Implantation on the 7th day. Here's the blastocyst. There's the inner cell mass. And it begins to implant. Now, the process of implantation would be scary if this was large. And it generates a whole lot of terms that we're not going to go into because we don't need to know all these terms. But the blastocyst begins to create invasive cells that moves into the endometrium as it begins to settle down inside. Here, and this illustration is too small, but again, PowerPoint, you don't have the option of zooming in or moving it around. It begins to invade deeper and deeper, and the inner cell mass, look at 2 colors, pale blue, yellow. Pale blue, yellow. 2 layers. This is the beginning of the human body here, strange though it may look. So we kind of start out looking like, you know, a horrible centipede or something. And it invades, and here we are at the end of the 7th day, and we have these 2 layers. This is the developing embryo. This is the decidua, but remember the old, that's an old name. The newer name for this is the stratum functionalis, where it implants. All right, so the blastocyst is now invaded, it has implanted, and it got more complicated in the process. It started to make a little cavity right there. Here it is, sitting on the surface. It's the best we can do. There's the outermost layer of cells of the blastocyst. Here's the inner cell mass right there. Now, those 3 layers, I'm going to click to see if we can see it better. No, we don't. I need a better illustration of it. It turns out that there are 3 layers that then develop: ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. 3 layers that develop inside this embryo. Here, the artist actually shows this. I don't use commercial PowerPoints. I simply steal right and left off the internet whatever I want. So, but I haven't got one of these yet. Here's the outermost layer, the ectoderm. Here's the middle layer, mesoderm. And then the innermost layer is the endo. See, ecto means outside, derm means skin, sort of. Well, but it also just means layer. Mesoderm, mes, not mesoderm, endoderm. Each of these is going to become something significant. Let's actually break out of the PowerPoint and make a note as to the fate of these 3 layers. Here's what we find. Most significantly, the ectoderm is going to become the epidermis. The structures that come from the epidermis, which includes your hair and your nails. If you were a bird, it would be feathers, and they would be ectoderm structures. Many skin, skin glands, and among those your oil glands, ray for acne. You also have sweat glands, mammary glands, and you think, well, mammary glands, they're deeper inside the chest, aren't they? No, actually, they begin to form on the surface, and then they multiply and invaginate and become that complicated group that we call the mammary glands. But they really are just ectoderm. So they become the skin glands. They also become the brain and spinal cord. And I'm telling you ahead of time that this is what people forget when they take the quiz, which is 2 weeks from today. They forget about this. Yeah, I said roughly like it would be the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, but earlier I'd said the Thursday. Let's go with the Thursday after Thanksgiving. We'll have the following Tuesday and Thursday to give them back and for people to get them who might miss because of illness or something. So that's 2 weeks from today. We'll have the quiz. That's okay. And that takes us off the same day for having a lab testing. So anyway, that's ectoderm. You say brain and spinal cord, they're deep inside our bones. How did they get there from the ectoderm? I'll show you that in a second. Let's finish these notes. Mesoderm. Mesoderm, when you step on the scales, this is pretty much what you weigh. The dermis. Now, another red flag. Don't say skin. If I say what comes from ectoderm and you say skin, you're wrong, because the dermis comes from mesoderm. If I say what comes from mesoderm and you say skin, you're wrong, because the epidermis came from the ectoderm. And so skin will always be the wrong answer if you ever see yourself writing it down. It's just like in 121, the word heart attack was always wrong. What's angina pectoris? Well, it's a heart attack. No, it's the pain of a distressed heart. It's the pain. What's a myocardial infarction? It's a heart attack. No, it's damage to the heart. You might not even feel it. Heart attack is a combination of the pain and the damage and et cetera, et cetera. I was telling my students on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday 121 class, don't ever write the word heart attack down. Wherever you're putting it down, it's wrong. Same thing with the word skin. Epidermis is the thin outer layer. The dermis is the thicker part of it. If you have leather shoes, that's dermis. What else comes from this? We find that the circulatory system, the skeletal and muscular systems, the kidneys, the etc. And I'm sure there's something else that I'm missing in here, except for the brain and spinal cord, central nervous system. Abbreviation for that. CNS. What's that stand for? Central nervous system. The endoderm is primarily lining. That is the lining of the gut, GI tract. What's GI stand for?
Gastrointestinal.
Gastrointestinal, for those who didn't answer. lining of that tract, the lining of the mouth, lining of the, the just inner border is actually, I don't want to get that complicated now. The lining of the GI tract, oh hell, the lungs, as well, the lining of the lungs, and etc. So those are the three major primary germ layers. This is not theoretical. We've studied this in pig embryos. We put dye into cells and follow where they go. Really, we know that this actually happens. I want to back up just one bit and make a comment here. Another big controversy is stem cell research in our society. Part of the reason it's controversial is, you know, the primary source for human stem cells is human embryos. And the big debate is, do we allow embryos to be fertilized, eggs to be fertilized in vitro, even in the lab, to create stem cells? Is this, you know, I joke about this being Justin Bieber, but is this the person that's going to figure out the energy source that saves the world, or what? But even if it's going to be a wretch, you know, that is a horse thief, then they can still deserve to survive. But on the other hand, you know, could it save lives? And that's what our society has a debate about. Right now, there's one source of stem cells. We're finding that we can get them from umbilical cords and sternum and places like that. So it continues to be very political, and the science often gets obscured in the process. And I just mentioned that. So this overly complicated bit is to try to give you the terms ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. I don't like that illustration. Now let's go back to the brain and spinal cord. Here we see some frog eggs, and there comes a point as it develops where you develop a groove, that neural groove, to make a human being. Here is the ectoderm, ectoderm. And then there's a region that's dedicated right down the back to becoming brain and spinal cord. It begins to fold in. Eventually it completely separates like this into a separate neural tube. And then we begin to develop bone. Then we make the cranium, then we make the vertebrae. But that's why what seems like almost the deepest part of us, the brain and spinal cord, actually comes from the ectoderm. Now, if you ask me why, my answer is I don't know. But it does. And this explains something. See how that's supposed to close off completely? Back to our concept of vitamins. We'll see this maybe a little bit later. No, I think I showed it to you when we did vitamins. Spina bifida? Yeah, you understand that part. Now, as the little embryo starts getting bigger, it begins to create additional membranes that weren't there. Which we're going to list in just a minute. They misspelled umbilical cord, the umbilical cord. People aren't perfect. There is the yolk sac. The human egg, as I said before, extremely tiny, so small that it's hard to see, has no shell and it has no yolk. There are actually people that have misconceptions, no pun intended, who think, I've had a woman tell me before this class, I actually thought that the human egg was the size of like a marble. You know? They said, no, it is so tiny you cannot see it. And if it's not fertilized, what happens to it? It disappears like any other cell. You know, it just fades away. I lost my train of thought. It's what my oh yeah, it contains no shell. And it contains no yolk. There is no yolk. It's just a big cell with a nucleus. Later, however, we begin to create a series of membranes. Now let me click once and see what I did. No, then I went into gestation period. So let's now talk about these membranes. Here we go with the notes. These are known as the embryonic membranes. I used to call them the extra-embryonic, just like the extracellular ion would be sodium. But I remember one time on an exam I asked, you know, what are the functions for the extracellular membranes? And a student wrote, well, because if they lose the originals, they've got extra. So I don't call them that anymore. They're just embryonic membranes. And we begin with the chorion. May I put a colon up here just so you understand that's not in the there is the chorion. Now the chorion is the interface between the embryo and the mother. It has many villi over its surface, and we will see those villi in a little bit. But like the roots of a plant, they invade the endometrium and they allow the baby's blood to get close to the mother. The baby's blood never really touches the mother's blood unless there's bleeding and the placenta tears loose. So sometimes at birth the mother might get some of the baby's blood. That's RH problems, maybe we're not going to deal with that. So the villi, like little roots, are just there inside the little pools of blood in the mother's endometrium to get oxygen, give up carbon dioxide, and so on. The chorion will become the placenta. And when does it change its name? It changes its name when it no longer wraps around the embryo. As the embryo gets bigger, the chorion doesn't grow that quickly. And pretty soon you've got a baby with a placenta off to one side. So we change the name as soon as it's pretty obviously off to one side. And we'll learn more about the placenta in a little bit. Another membrane that's produced is the yolk sac. No K's. It's biology. We don't put a K on our sacs. And the yolk sac, you'll never guess what it does in a million years. Go. No, time's up. Produces the first blood cells. How odd. And I predict that before I retire, they'll change its name. I predict it's going to be called the hemopoietic membrane, because that's what it does. It does not contain yolk. We think of yolk as food storage. So the little developing chicken has something to eat. I mean, when it breaks out of the egg, you've got a full-grown, walking around, down-eyed, eyeballs, open chicken that can break its way out of an eggshell. How did it develop? Where did it get lunch? There's a big yolk in that egg. But not humans. We absorb it all from the beginning. So when we make the yolk sac, I don't even know why we still call it the yolk sac. After a while, the baby's liver takes over. Now the next membrane we shall mention is the amnion. The amnion is the bag of waters. I don't know why we pluralize waters, but it's an old term. It is fluid-filled sac, and its purpose primarily is to cushion the developing embryo or fetus. Its primary function. Yes?
Did you say amnion or amnion?
Thank you, I left off an M. See, it red flagged me there, but I don't trust it. Oh, how about that? Bill Gates actually has it in there. Chorionic's in there. Chlorine, choroid, cheriton, and acetylricin. That's that chorion. It doesn't even have villi in this dictionary. Villi. I have a villi on the Riviera. When I retire, I'm going to get a villi on the Riviera. I'm laughing. It's just like being married when I'm talking to you sometimes. I tell these jokes over breakfast. Then lastly, there is the allantois. And the allantois helps produce the umbilical cord. There, done. There are 4 embryonic membranes then that are significant. These are all created by the embryo or the baby. A placenta, mama didn't make it. Baby constructed that. So it's like jumping off the cliff and building your own wings. Baby makes the own. So if you take a little sample of the chorion or the placenta, you've got the genetics of the baby, because that's got the baby's genome. Okay, if we've got these 4 down here, I shall resume the PowerPoint. That's corresponding screen. No, wait, stop. It's on the website too. So, fire. Let's look at this thing. Here we see the amniotic sac, bag of waters. That will usually rupture as we get close to delivery. Sometimes that's what causes delivery. There's no control over it. It's not urine. You've got no sphincters. You could be standing in line at Walmart, and then it breaks, and you can't stop this gush of fluid. And one woman I knew carried around a glass jar of pickles, and if it broke somewhere, like on the subway or whatever, she would drop that. Oh, look, I got it all over me, you know. Another woman was talking to me saying that she was actually interviewing a potential hire because she was an executive. She was seated in her chair, her waters broke. And so she finished the interview, didn't get up, shook the hand, say, we'll get in touch with you, and then after he left, you know, called and said, I need to change the clothes. This is why men leave the room, as I said before, because you get the women together and, oh, where did your waters break? I was right in the middle of class. I had to wait till everybody left. No, that's not happening in class yet. Anyhow, that's the amnion, the bag of water. Sometimes the obstetrician will actually encourage delivery by simply using something akin to a knitting needle and just simply tearing that membrane, and that will often trigger delivery. Here's the yolk sac we see here. That says chorionic villi, but you can't see any villi. You can see it down here. See this nice photograph? This is lovely. We see that the iris is beginning to develop, not the iris, the retina. We see the fold between the developing cerebellum and the cerebrum, the arms beginning to develop. Here's the yolk sac down there. The only, you know, you can stand up and back and you can't see that. And out here it says placenta, but frankly at this stage it's still just a chorion. Click. Gestation refers to the time in which you are pregnant. So we're going to talk about this. We say 9 months. They say more accurately is 40 weeks, because some months are long, some are short. By day 35, by the end of the first month, we have a heart that is beating, and the eye and the limb buds are present. So here we go at 4 weeks. Now, frankly, at 4 weeks, this could be a turtle. This could be a giraffe. They all look extremely similar. Evolutionists are very fond of pointing out that this design is the same, whether it's going to be a fish or a bird or a reptile or Michelangelo. There's a tail and things like that. Creationists will go on the other side and say, you can't create the jaw without creating these various parts that will grow together. You know, what looks like a tail is just a spinal cord growing a little bit faster, etc. Plus, they would say, why make a completely different design for everything? Every building on this campus has buff brick and cinder block putting it together. So they argue back and forth to each other. That's fine. I just stand back and watch. It's fine. 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Actual length is like this. No, that's no good because you're supposed to be looking in the textbook to see actual length. So please ignore what it says is actual length. So, but it is continuing to grow. And then it continues on to get more and more complicated. The human embryology is the most complicated of any of the embryology of the vertebrates. Pig embryos pretty much cover the same thing. So if you study pig embryology, you pretty much got humans. But we're as complicated as it gets. There's nothing that has a more complicated embryology than human beings. So you see it in the process of gradually beginning to create a jaw. You know, I mean, telling you, man, we look ugly during some of the early stages here. We start to develop fingers, we get notches. And the hands, look at here, on the 40th day you begin to make fingers, but not yet toes. I mentioned before that there is a metabolic gradient from your head to your feet. This part has the highest metabolism, and it reduces as you go down. Think again one more time. How often do you have to trim your fingernails compared to your toenails? You know, your hands grow faster, and the head has an even faster rate of growth. And here, a beautiful illustration. This boy baby being formed. We see the penis here. Sonogram. We say, okay, paint the place blue. I've mixed opinions about knowing whether it's going to be a boy or a girl. I had our kids in the days when we had no idea what it was going to be. And so-and-so. It's a surprise. It would be terrible to be born and hear your parents go, oh. Okay, well, that's going to leave a mark. But anyway, nowadays we know. What happens when you don't know is that all of your baby shower presents are yellow and green. Can't give you pink or blue until after you have the baby. Did I tell you that each of our boys still knows the name that they would have been? Yeah, one was Stephanie Rebecca. This was back in the 60s. One was going to be April Dawn. Oh, poor girl. But fortunately she was a boy, so she got the name she did. Here we see the chorionic villi, the amniotic sac, the ear beginning to form, the jaw. Yeah, this is obviously at this point not going to be a bird. You know, it's pretty much heading towards being a human. Here's the umbilical cord, which is quite large. If it kept the same diameter all the way up to birth in relationship to the growth of the fetus, we would have belly buttons the size of dinner plates. And we'd think they'd be cute. We'd show them off in a 2-piece and put metal rings on the edges, you know. But it would be different. But it didn't have to get that much bigger. All right, here we go, 56th day. I'm clicking right along here because it's just what we need is a slow motion video on this. Rather fascinating. We have pictures of this where they actually suck their thumb, because they do. The umbilical cord, not smaller, it's just that the fetus is getting bigger. And here's another view of the umbilical cord here that's formed. Here are the villi of the chorion, and here is the endometrium. And so what you really have is little blood pools where the villi are soaking up the oxygen, giving up the carbon dioxide, giving up wastes, picking up things. Click, click. Okay, let me back up now. Unfortunately, the amnion or the placenta is not a filter. When mom has a cup of coffee, the baby's heart rate increases. When mom smokes, the baby's blood vessels constrict. When mom takes cocaine, the baby gets a shock with cocaine. And some nurses know, who work with children, NICU and such, that crack babies are hard to comfort. They were born with an addiction, but you're not going to give it to them, and their nervous systems are just ravaged. It's a terrible way to make a transition. And so even like a sugar overdose, you know, the extra sugar goes into the baby as well. And it's rough on the baby's developing pancreas. When a woman becomes pregnant, she has an obligation to live clean and be careful how she lives. That's why it's kind of good to know that you're pregnant, but far better is to say, you know, I'm in danger of pregnancy. I ought to get clean now and get my vitamins up now, especially, what is it that helps to avoid folic acid? I'm sorry. What is the, if you don't get enough folic acid, what do you get?
Spina bifida.
Spina bifida. So, yeah. Good advice. Now, when we get together next time, I'm going to stop there, we're going to talk about the hormones that are going up and down during pregnancy. Today's Thursday. Tuesday, we're going to give birth, take care of this baby, and all that.